But Adam, let's just kick things off. A brief bit of news here coming out of Minnesota.
Yeah, we're coming up on the end of the legislative session here in Minnesota. May 20th is the final day, and they went deep into the night last night on Wednesday as we record this on Thursday. And apologies as I hear my own voice begin to scratch there. I'm not sure any human being has ever come home healthy from the SBC conference. 2 years ago, I came home with COVID, and this year I came home with some sort of cold flu bug that refuses to let go of me and my voice. So you probably heard me talking to you scratchy at the conference, and you'll hear me talking to you scratchy a little bit right now. So in Minnesota, the bill that had initially been proposed for sports betting has been rolled into a historical horse racing bill. The concern here really hasn't changed over the course of time. Horse racing tracks in the state have been unhappy with the structure of the bill. They want licenses to offer sports betting. Tribes have exclusivity in Minnesota. They have offered a cut of revenue, an increased cut this year from what it was in the 2023 proposal. That has not yet been enough. There was a long floor debate in which it started to come up last night and then was tabled back to Friday. So when you think about that, you think about the fact that, we are running out of days when we start talking about getting something done by May 20th, when this is going to come up on May 17th. The feeling in Minnesota is that this does not happen this year. And what seems most remarkable about that is that there appeared to be broad consensus 2 years ago to get this done in Minnesota. There appeared to be at least an understanding this year of what went wrong 2 years ago, and things seem to have gone even farther off the rails this year when we look at what happened involving HHR and then the lawsuit between tracks, tribes. We are farther away from this happening in Minnesota, I think, than we were in 2023, and it just goes to show that not all of the states that have legalized were easy. Some had their challenges, but there are reasons that the states that are still on the board are still on the board. And when you talk about having to address tribal exclusivity and other interests like horse racing, and then the usual politics, which got in the way last year because the Democrat Farmer Labor Party last year was leading this charge, and when they saw that there was resistance, they knew they had both chambers of the legislature and the governor's seat, and they wanted to be able to go to their constituents and say, look what we got done for you. And sports betting was too hard of a lift for that, and it got left out of the package of things that got done. So Minnesota has a few days left, but not looking promising at the moment.
One other bit of news, guys, over at LSR. You can read the full story for yourself. A guy that we've mentioned a ton out of New York, Joe Adabo, going at it again over there, introducing some stuff that would raise the fantasy sports age to 21 from 18. Also introduced 1% of the tax revenue would go towards problem gambling, which also would be a good thing. And then getting rid of the ridiculous deal that we've talked about multiple times in this podcast where so you can't bet on awards market. There's these certain states that for whatever reason don't allow you to bet on in-state stuff, which is just silly because it's like doesn't change anything. You still bet on other stuff. You can't on in-state stuff. So it would allow New Yorkers to place award market bet futures and stuff like that on New York players and New York teams and things like that, which weirdly was not allowed somewhere along the way. But again, all of that over on LSR as well. But Adam, do want to get to you. We were out last week as you were over there with all the rest of the news makers, all the headline makers over there talking some stuff at SBC. So what were your biggest takeaways?
I would amend that to say the news makers and me. That's definitely not a category that I would ever place myself in. I will give credit to our team at Legal Sports Report. We had 3 guys on the floor plus myself, and there were a number of panels at SBC. They did great work. Did Mike Mazzio, Sam McQuillan, and Jim Gazzali to get around and not only take in those panels, but of course talk to some of the people that we don't get the opportunity to see day to day very often. Now, I'll take you back a little bit to the beginning of the conference on Monday. Not something that everyone attended, but I was at the Capital Markets Forum at the New York Stock Exchange, and a lot of very, very interesting discussion about the future of investment in the space, right? These were folks that we don't hear from as often who are more in control of the purse strings than on the legislative or the regulatory side, right? These are the folks who are talking about investing in the space and where they see that going. And Matt, what's really shocking to me in a way, probably shouldn't be shocking, but I was surprised, is how, what would you say, 2+ years ago, we began talking about the DFS plus flex space, the sweepstakes space, what the future of that was going to look like, and why there wasn't more attention being paid to it, right? We talked about the fact that we were surprised that the legacy operators were not challenging what was going on in the prize picks and underdog space. Then we spent last year talking about almost nothing but that, and that really was the big topic of discussion at both the Capital Markets Forum and then on the floor of SBC. What does the future of investment in those spaces look like? Heard different visions of that, right? We heard some say, yeah, it's going to be difficult for the DFS plus sweeps companies to get investment because there are regulatory gray clouds hanging above them, right? Also heard some opinions that said, maybe the clouds aren't as gray as they were a few months ago, right? We saw a flurry of regulatory action at the end of football season, which, as we discussed, was no surprise, right? The regulators allowed these companies to finish football season, and then once they finished football season, a number of cease and desist letters came in across the country. So where does that leave us now? It leaves us in a very interesting spot where everybody in the industry is quite well aware of how difficult it's going to be to not only legalize sports betting, but to figure out the future of what happens with these daily fantasy plus flex, whatever you want to call it, companies. And then as we start to see these sweepstakes sports betting operators come around as well, what happens with those in the future also? That's one area. Then, of course, the natural topic of discussion for everyone as we talk about the difficulty of sports betting legislation. If you want to talk about an even heavier lift than sports betting legislation, why don't you talk about iGaming legislation? Because that was what was next on everyone's lips in New York and New Jersey during the SBC North America Conference. We know there are only 7 states that have some form of iGaming right now. There were lobbyists who expressed their frustration. There were industry observers who said, don't hold your breath because this is a much heavier legislative lift than sports betting was. There are those who are kind of dreaming on the potential of it for a few years from now and saying, this is what goes on down the line. I overheard a couple of conversations as I was just standing around the floor. The sorts of conversations, Matt, that you only hear when you just happen to be in a big group of people and you're listening to things. But I heard some of the folks from one company that has been making a lot of noise lately in terms of legacy sports betting and casino saying, yeah, you know what? We really are looking at casino more than we are at sports betting, right? We see where we can get to a bigger market share in casino when it comes to being able to activate the people who we have right now. They are more people that we think we can get into casino and iGaming than into sports betting. So really, we've moved to another phase of this conversation. Do I want to call it 2.0? No, not necessarily. But we have moved to another phase of conversation here where it's not so much a matter of the gold rush and going out and getting people and what do you do in order to get them in the door. But as we've talked about, it's now a matter of not only how do you get them in the door, and that discussion's not over, of course, because there was also talk of online lottery and the Jack Pocket deal with DraftKings and how do you bring people in at lower costs. But it's also very much a discussion of if we are going to have to bring people in at those types of lower costs, what channels do we have available to us? And then, of course, how do we expand the map? Can we expand the map? Sports betting looks like it's going to be very difficult, maybe outside of Missouri, where it appears that it will qualify for the ballot this year to get anything done within 2024. So overarching themes, that's what I noticed on the floor at SBC over the course of my time there.